let's talk about the impact to Microsoft here. It's something we've been talking about for quite some time in terms of the fact that it looks as though Valve and Microsoft are on a kind of collision course. On the one side, you have a big supporter of the PC space, obviously. Both of them are, obviously, but Microsoft, they're the stewards of Windows 11. They're really interested in bringing together Xbox and Windows 11. The Xbox Ally X kind of showed some initial ideas on how they plan to do that. Not entirely convinced based on the initial showing, whereas with Valve, they're moving SteamOS into the console space effectively, and it's doing a much better job. We've got this comment here from Phil Spencer on the launch, and let's just read the quote. Gaming moves forwards when players and developers have more ways to play and create, especially across open platforms. Expanding access across PC, console, and handheld devices reflects a future built on choice, core values that have guided Xbox's vision from the start. As one of the largest publishers on Steam, we welcome new options for players to access games everywhere. Congrats on today's announce. Oliver, where are we on this?
Well, that statement in particular, I think, is a little bit funny because he's basically saying, well, it's great to have open platforms. And then as one of the largest publishers on Steam, we welcome new players to access games everywhere. And I mean, that's true in the sense that Microsoft is a big publisher. There are a lot of big publishers on Steam. But obviously, Microsoft, they're still in the business of shipping Windows devices. They're still in the business of shipping consoles. And I think in the context of Microsoft's like broader hardware and software offerings, that kind of statement is a I don't know, possibly a bit problematic. I mean, I don't really draw too much into that, but I think you have possibly two angles to this whole discussion, and I think the narrower angle is something people have been focusing on a little bit more so with this initial announcement, which is that obviously the Steam Machine effort looks a lot like Microsoft's next-gen Xbox effort in a few different ways, right? In terms of its software offering here, probably is fairly similar to what Microsoft wants to achieve with that effort. Now, obviously, the Steam Machine won't compete with Magnus on a hardware level. Maybe future SteamOS devices could, but obviously this is not going to be competitive with something with a reasonable RDNA 5-based GPU here. But the second point, I think, is broader, and that's basically the sense in which Valve is basically saying, here is a lineup of gaming-focused software and hardware offerings that run Windows games without Windows. They have a home theater box, a headset, and handhelds, and they're using x86 and ARM, and they have third parties involved with Lenovo, potentially other third parties involved in future Steam Machine efforts as well. So Microsoft makes a ton of money selling Windows licenses for gaming systems and getting their various apps and services, like Copilot, which I know Alex loves, onto gaming devices. And this is like a significant threat to that. I'm not going to say it's like a huge immediate threat to it because obviously these devices aren't on the market. We don't know exactly how broad Valve will go with this effort. But if you think about the broad swath of gaming devices out there, especially lower cost gaming devices that might be impacted by especially a cut price Steam Machine device or impacted by a flood of a range of Steam Machine devices, of other similar devices across the range. You obviously have impacts in the handheld space already. You might have future impacts in the handheld space with ARM processors. You might have phones running SteamOS games. I mean, there are all kinds of different avenues Valve is pushing into with this effort, where I think the ramifications of it are absolutely huge for Microsoft. So I think that is a direct threat to Microsoft's gaming business model. It's a threat to Windows potentially. It's a threat to a lot of things. And yeah, I mean, obviously Microsoft as a third-party publisher will continue to fare reasonably well, I imagine, on Steam, and will fare reasonably well across their different platforms they're targeting games on. But that's not all they are. They're also shipping a platform. They're also shipping an operating system. They're also shipping Game Pass. They're also shipping all these other things that like are not operable, at least not currently with this effort.
Yeah, much to think about. I'm going to bring in some supporter questions here because this topic has come up, perhaps not surprisingly. Regardless asks, hello gents, exclamation point, is the Gabe Cube Gabe Cube. Is the Gabe Cube also an Xbox? Well, Microsoft would say it is, but I think Oliver's put a convincing case forward that perhaps not. And will you include it in your benchmarks and optimize settings videos in the future? Probably not. Retro Sean asks, do you think that the Steam quote-unquote console will disrupt Microsoft's plans for Xbox? It almost seems like Valve is going to launch first in the quote-unquote console that's also a PC space. Let's talk about regardless's question. It kind of is an Xbox if you're Microsoft, because they're saying everything is an Xbox. You could actually play Xbox Game Studio games on it. That's kind of the extent to which it is an Xbox, unless you install Windows on it, which you probably don't want to do. Retro Sean's question is possibly a bit more interesting, because from my perspective, each of these companies is coming towards the same objective, but from two very different positions. So essentially, you have Valve that have produced an entry-level box with a fully featured interface that is really, really good. And then you have Microsoft that is aiming with its Magnus APU to be a super high-end device with cutting-edge machine learning features, excellent ray-tracing performance. But as of this moment, we don't really know what the interface is going to look like, but based on what we've seen on the Xbox One LIX, it's not particularly compelling. What do you think about that, Alex?
Wow. Well, just to really briefly get to regardless's question, I just want to say I don't think it's an Xbox, and that the idea of integrating into benchmarks and optimized settings videos is kind of like a maybe-ish. I never will promise this, but I like the idea of one sitting on my desk. And when I do optimize settings, I would just like to see how it runs on them, the optimized settings I do generate, to see if it's meaningfully different than the Windows experience for some reason, or see if it's meaningfully different than my usual RTX 4060. That would be something that would be some nice commentary, and it wouldn't take too long, hopefully, to just run the settings on that device. So that could be the way it might look in a video of mine in the future. I'm going to piggyback off of what Oliver said. I think this is a direct threat to talk about Retro Sean's question. I think this is a direct threat to the Microsoft ecosystem in a great way, because it's exciting people. Usually, it is different. I don't think anyone's looking at this and hate watching the video. I think they're very interested in to see what Valve has to produce, because maybe some experience with Windows, or maybe some experience with the current hardware market is upsetting people. And I think it is, based upon the amount of rage bait you see on YouTube. And I think, that is really appealing, something like a more positive look at PC. And I feel like that is it. And it's speaking to the PC experience. It has console-like ambitions, but you scroll down to the end of the Valve page and it says, and it's a PC. Who are we to tell you what you're supposed to do with your PC? And I really liked that little extra bit they added in there, because that's the truth of the matter. A PC, you can do you can install that terrible Windows 11 on it if you really want to. I think they are first to market here. And I said it in the last video, which I think a lot of people didn't understand, when I said, hey, it's interesting to see them being the pioneers of this ecosystem of the handheld form factor PC. And also they've got VR attached to it. They're kind of doing the stuff that both PS5 and Sony and Microsoft want to do in their next generation, but they're doing it earlier than them. They've already got their Steam Decks out there. They're going to be bringing this out there. Microsoft and, oddly enough, Sony are going to be playing a little bit of catch up in some degree, at least, in terms of getting the hardware out, and especially for Microsoft, having a software bed that actually works and makes sense, which I have yet to be convinced of at all. I actually think Valve's going to probably do a much better job for the next foreseeable few years. And having streamlined, good, reliable software. I feel like Sean. Yeah, this is definitely the first console that's also a PC, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I think also the other thing to bear in mind, I think Oliver alluded to this, is if you kind of strip back the hardware announcements and look at the strategy, you are potentially looking at a situation where Valve, you talk about Microsoft saying everything is an Xbox. Well, the way things are going, everything is going to be a Steam machine of some description because, they've got ARM covered off seemingly. We've got to say, though, that that ARM translation layer, it could obviously apply to a whole range of devices from phones to tablets upwards to PCs that aren't based on x86, for example. But we still need to actually test that translation layer. We've seen one in the Windows space, which at launch wasn't particularly good, but remains to be seen how good this one is. And I think, it was going to be really interesting to test that out on a range of ARM devices, especially that NVIDIA laptop when it comes about. That's going to be really interesting. I could imagine, essentially NVIDIA's been locked out of the PC gaming SoC space because they don't have an x86 license. Well, suddenly maybe they don't need one anymore. It's all going to come down to how good that translation layer is, both in its Windows and in its Linux guises. So, from a strategic perspective, that's, Valve is essentially making a move on, well, again, stealing Microsoft's lunch. They're not just talking the talk, they're walking the walk here because they've actually got the technologies out there, in the very immediate future, which I think is really, really interesting. We've also got the rather curious situation where the Valve machine is going to be running all of the Xbox games and then the PlayStation games when they come out as well. Which is really, really interesting. And it's to the point now, talking about everything being a Steam machine. Well, the next generation Xbox is going to allow you to access your Steam games. So again, if everything is a Steam machine, the next Xbox is going to be one as well. Which, who would have believed that a few years ago?